Here we are, the Godzilla movie with the ending that turned every fan into an emotional wreck. Because if you can read Japanese, you know that the little tagline on the Japanese poster that says Godzilla shis translates to Godzilla dies. The entire movie was marketed around Godzilla's death. Because this was the movie that Toho was planning to end the series with by killing Godzilla. Not just having a giant monster rumble like in Destroy All Monsters, killing their star character. So this movie has probably the most intense opening for any Godzilla movie. It starts out with Mickey heading to Birth Island to check up on Godzilla and Little Godzilla, only to find out that it's gone. The only thing left is a giant black smoke, and you're like, whoa, what happened? Then we see Godzilla rampaging in Hong Kong. Okay, aside from attacking Hong Kong, nothing really new there, right? Wrong. This time, Godzilla is glowing red, and his atomic breath is 300 times more powerful than it's ever been before. To figure out what happened, G-Force hires a college student who studies Godzilla, and happens to be the grandson of Dr. Yamane from the first movie. He explains that Godzilla's heart is basically a nuclear reactor, and it's on the verge of exploding, or worse, melting down. Just like a regular nuclear reactor would work. Meanwhile, a scientist following in the footsteps of Dr. Serizawa has come across a formula similar to Serizawa's formula for the oxygen destroyer. And as you would imagine, this does not sit well with the Japanese government, because as Serizawa's sacrifice in the first movie has proven anything, is that the oxygen destroyer could be used as a weapon more terrifying than the H-bomb. And sure enough, the oxygen destroyer formula creates a bunch of little crab creatures that eventually morph into the devil monster known as Destoroyah. Since now the oxygen destroyer is in monster form, G-Force figures that it could be used to kill Godzilla and prevent the inevitable meltdown. This is, in every sense of the word, a perfect Godzilla movie. The monster action is spectacular. The amazing score from Akira Ifukube is, well, amazing. And it should be, because this was the very last score he ever did before going into retirement permanently. There is so much emotion tied to this movie if you are really a Godzilla fan. Now, it does tie into the original Godzilla in a great way, but you've heard me rant about Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah's timeline alteration, so just go back to my Space Godzilla review if you really don't know what I'm talking about. Because for the sake of this being the last one, I'm not going to go rant about it again. Now, as I mentioned, the main human character is the grandson of Dr. Yamane from the first movie, and his aunt happens to be Emiko Yamane, played once again by Momoko Kochi from the original Godzilla. After she did the first Godzilla movie, she did The Mysterians with Ishiro Honda, and then retired from acting because she didn't like being associated with Godzilla. However, something must have changed her mind, because it was great to see her in this movie in what would be her final film role before her death. Now, Destoroyah is a really freaking cool creation. I mean, first he starts out as a crab, then as like a flying bat or something, then into his final form, which is fucking awesome. Probably one of the most creative monster designs I've ever seen in any Godzilla movie. Little Godzilla is back as Godzilla Jr., and it's the first time Godzilla's son was actually made cool, because one thing, he actually looks like his dad, and two, he gets into a fight with Destoroyah and actually beats him before something happens to... Alright, I've already said that Godzilla dies, so, and this movie's been out for about 18 years, so I'll just go ahead and say, remember how Space Godzilla kidnapped Junior and imprisoned him in the last movie? Well, Destoroyah basically goes to Godzilla and says, you know what, the last monster imprisoned your son? I'm going to kill your son! So basically, Junior dies in this movie, which infuriates Godzilla and brings him closer to Meltdown, but not before fighting Destoroyah. So what does the Self-Defense Force do besides watch? Well, they've modified their tanks with freezer weapons to hopefully cool down Godzilla, and a new weapon called the Super X-3, because the last two Super X weapons worked so well. Actually, this one works pretty well, because one thing, it's a jet. It has the armor of the Super X, and the great mobility of the Super X2, and it doesn't get destroyed at all. The only problem I have with this movie, it's hard for me to get attached to the characters because, again, I've not seen this movie in its Japanese language. So, like Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, I feel that if I saw this in its Japanese language, I would adore this movie even more than I do right now. And I would probably be even more of an emotional wreck at the end. Which brings me to Godzilla's death. Now, I should mention again, as I mentioned in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the movies between King Ghidorah and this movie weren't released in Japan until 1998 and 1999. This one wasn't released in 1999, but to give you an idea of how big the news was of Godzilla's death, CNN ran a news story about it in 1995, the year it came out in Japan. And obviously we didn't get to see this movie till 1999. By the time I saw this movie, I was about 8 years old. And I was so in love with Godzilla to the point that I was not ready for how this movie was going to play out. Watching Godzilla die in this movie was one of the top 5 saddest moments I've ever experienced watching a movie. I know it's just a guy in a rubber suit, but the way the scene plays out makes it even more powerful. That and the emotional attachment I had to Godzilla. After Destoroyah has been killed and Godzilla has reached his melting point, the Japanese Self-Defense Force starts firing all their freezer weapons at him, and in the middle of the firing, the sound effects slowly die down as the score used for the scene plays, and I just became an emotional wreck, especially when Godzilla let out his final dying roar and melted into the earth. When I saw this for the first time, I cried my eyes out. I could not watch this movie again for another 5 years. Even watching it today, while I don't cry my eyes out, it still makes me cry. Even as a college student, this scene is still powerful. The original ending was that Destoroyah was around when Godzilla was melting down, and basically Godzilla would take Destoroyah with him, killing them both. But Toho figured out that that would be inappropriate since they've marketed the whole movie for Godzilla's death, and they figured that Destoroyah would be killed by the Japanese Self-Defense Force and Godzilla so that Godzilla would have the spotlight for the climax of the film. Which was a very smart decision, Toho. Good work. After this, Junior's deceased body absorbs all of Godzilla's radiation, so Tokyo doesn't end up a ghost town, and Junior basically turns into a full-grown Godzilla. And the last shot of this movie is Godzilla in silhouette, and James Rolfe said that they were probably hinting at a Godzilla series following Junior, all grown up, but I like to think that this shot was meant to symbolize that no matter what happens, no matter how many years go by, Godzilla will live on forever. So in the end, I've already said everything that's great about this movie and spoiled the ending of it, but even though I spoiled the ending, you still really should see this movie. Even if you're not a Godzilla fan, it's worth seeing in your lifetime. Maybe when I find the Japanese version of this, I will change my rating to get off your ass and go see it now, because I absolutely love this movie. And two things before I take off. Even though this wasn't the last Godzilla movie, this was the last Godzilla movie to be made by any of the original creators. 2 years after this movie came out, producer Tomiyuki Tanaka died in 1997. And then Akira Ifukube went into retirement permanently and then died in 2006. And then, obviously, as fans know this was not the Godzilla movie to end it all, because after this, we didn't know what was going to happen next. And boy, did we have no idea what was going to happen next. Okay, calm down. Calm down. Fans are saved by the fact that there is a third Godzilla series, which I will get into details about that tomorrow, but in any case, I really do adore this movie. That is my review. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you watched the movie. Leave a comment below if you've seen the movie, haven't. If you agree with me, disagree with me, that stuff, and I will see you tomorrow with the start of the third and final Godzilla series. So, I will see you later. Bye.